Hi everybody. So in this video, I am going to review some submissions from activity 7 and 8 that were in the Dropbox this morning. I've removed all names from them and I cherry picked certain pages and examples that I think would be applicable to all students and that I think would be really good examples and things to learn from. So I'm just going to go sheet by sheet. There's 20 pages total, and I will start here. So right off the bat, even though this page was in one of the activities, it was included. And so just to provide a little bit of feedback for it, it does say project description, and then there's the table of contents. So in the assignment, it's actually called project introduction. And so this is less specific than the individual project description. So instead of this being like your cabin project, the project introduction is more like, what is the project of the assignment? So it's essentially in the assignment brief, there's an area called context, and that is where a good chunk of what the project introduction could be found. I have copied and pasted it below, and the highlighted portion is the portion that specifically deals with what you might put on this page. It says the design challenge for this project is to satisfy the space needs of a one-bedroom cabin getaway for a writer/artist. Due to the spatial constraints of this cabin, built-ins should be considered, as well as furniture solutions that involve adaptable or multi-use solutions. And then the remainder of that paragraph is more or less writing for you for this assignment. So that highlighted version, you could put that into your own words for the project introduction. You could even suggest who the client is, even though there will be another client profile area, which leads me to this page. At the top, you see client profile and design aesthetic. So my main critique on this page is to try to keep your rows of text no longer than half the width of the page. It looks okay on the computer, but once it's printed at full scale, it is text that long becomes uncomfortable to read. It's just, an unnatural, there's nothing, erroneous about it, but it is an unnatural way of reading text, and we're just not trained to do that. So to make it easier on any readers or viewers of your document, it's always a good idea to keep rows of text to at least half a page or even less. So that is the one thing I would suggest. And then the other thing, that already is going to change the composition to this page a little bit. And I understand this page has a lot of data on it, but based upon the effect that bringing that in to half a page will have, I would suggest thinking about graphic cues that you can add to really call out the different areas. So there's an area that says spatial needs and then standard measurements. I think you could, highlight or separate spatial needs from standard measurements. Otherwise, I do find myself kind of searching for those subtitles to find what exactly I'm looking at. So any type of organization on this page, and it is fairly organized and there's a lot of data. So even more the importance of organizing all of these words. And here is an example of some of the prototypical drawings. The first thing I noticed was the scan or photograph quality. I wasn't sure if these are scans or photographs because scans usually don't come in this brown. So if it's possible to try to scan them in black and white, that would eliminate brown. It's possible maybe they were scanned in color, and that's why they're coming in that way. Black and white should eliminate that. If there is an issue like this or you're kind of feeling stumped, let's go over that one-on-one sometime. And then I am noticing that some of the lines in each one of these images, they're not always aligned. So you can see in this upper left-hand corner, the dimension line is not straight. It looks like it's angled, like the photograph maybe was taken at a different angle than the living space, for instance. And so each one looks like it's a different photograph that was taken at a slightly different angle. So I would try to minimize that as much as possible, and just doing a flat scan in black and white hopefully would solve both of those issues. One thing I also noticed was the scale that was provided in the PowerPoint is a little blurry as it's coming in. I had created a pink version of this that you can change to any color, but it was vectorized in PowerPoint as opposed to this being an image. So either try and go back and use that one and maybe edit it to your page composition, or create your own based on, your own aesthetics. But that is coming in a little blurry. At least something as simple as this shouldn't be coming in blurry. It should be fairly crisp. Okay, so now we are looking at some bubble diagrams. Yeah, I mean, this is going to bounce between submissions, so you're going to see a lot of different things in order. The first thing I noted was that there's some strong color coding going on. It looks like it's color coded per floor, but I'm not completely sure if that's accurate. So make sure that there is a color coding legend on every page where color coding or any type of coding occurs. Even if you called it out on the page previous, you want to make sure that there's indication on every single page what each color or line weight specifically means. And then other than this, great composition on the page and dimensioning. The scan version is coming in, okay, it's not super clear. So I'd recommend to either touch up the original to make it more scannable, so perhaps pen, or plan any written portions such as dimensions or titles digitally. Because that's when you scan, or when you zoom in and when you look at the scan, a lot of where the fuzziness is happening is in the dimensions or the numbers, or even the labels at the bottom. So if that's something that you're finding applies to your drawings, go ahead and just save those areas to put in digitally. That's totally fine. And then here are it's the same project, we're just seeing a different diagram. So I can already see the improvement of the addition of pen. If you notice, the floor plan, or like the walls and everything, is a lot more clear in how it's reading. And so my one suggestion is try to keep all writing, such as the room labels, consistent. So, all of them on a straight line, or all of them, on the diagonal line, whatever works best with your design, as much as can be. Try to keep that a little bit more consistent. And then again, you will want to have color coding on this page as well, because you are using the colors here also. And then also just double check, this is for everybody, whenever you put something, in PowerPoint, save it as a PDF and then open it and see how well it's actually coming in. So there is a little bit of adjusting happening from when you take a scan to when you bring it into PowerPoint, and then when you save it as a PDF, and then when you open it in your PDF viewer. So the image goes through a lot of transitions, and that can affect its quality. So just, double check that as you go through your project. Here are some more prototypicals. The first thing I noticed is that these are nice and legible. The line weights are, even though they're pencil and you can tell that they're a little lighter, they are very consistent. So I would either recommend, tracing over them with pen or finding way in PowerPoint to touch up where you see where my cursor is here. It's really common when we start writing to press harder when we put our pen or pencil down. And then as we draw our line, we lighten up until we get to the end. We also do that when we speak. We start out loud, and then when we trail off to the end of the sentence, we sort of quiet down. It's interesting that humans do that in a lot of different ways. So just be cognizant that we do that and notice that in your technique when you're drawing. And that happens when you're drawing any type of line. Noticed that. The other thing I noticed was this first floor plan bath is 4x6. And it's looking really small. So if the width of this bathroom is 4 feet, that means the shower stall, which looks about half of that, is a 2x2, which would be, like a shower stall, maybe, really it's smaller than it should be, is what I'm saying. So this bathroom is actually undersized and it's visually noticeable. So the first thing I did, and I thought, what can we do, is I added a foot. So instead of 4 feet, it's 5 feet. So now we have 5 feet by 6 feet. And then when we're thinking about doors, a typical door opening, as you have been finding through your measurements, is usually about 3 feet. The door panel itself is slightly smaller to account for the frame. But the 3-foot opening is what you're thinking about, and that's half of 6 feet. So this door panel is going to be half of this entire wall. Here it looks like it's almost divided into thirds. So if you stay with 6 feet, just remember that 3 feet is half of that, and what would that then turn to. And so you can already see that when the door is placed in the middle, it's actually making the space less functional. So when you open this door panel, you have this tiny little sliver of space, and then the door swing is actually, getting in the way of everything on the left-hand side. So even though we've added more space, we're still encountering some spatial issues. My recommendation would be to locate the door closest to a wall. So push this door back along this wall. So you'll leave like a few inches. If you were to look around your house and see how doors are placed that open up along a wall, there's usually a few inches before they touch the wall. But then you have more open space to the left to locate everything. You might even find yourself needing to go a little bigger than this. So make sure that, first of all, your interior components, such as the shower, the toilet, and the vanity, are measured correctly and that they are coming in at scale. So for the vanity, for instance, I would recommend going to, even Lowe's or HomeDepot.com and looking up sinks, or look up a bathroom sink that you like, or one that you would hypothetically put in this cabin, and look at the size of it, and then use those sizes to then design the counter space or the vanity around it. And also think about storage in the bathroom as well, and think about how to use space. So there's really small things that you can add to liven up a space. So thinking about a towel bar, a toilet paper holder, hooks for robes, anything like that, a little rug, just like we talked about in assignment 1. Those little tiny details help a space read better without having to, really analyze what we're looking at. It's not every space has really distinct symbols like a toilet. Sometimes it's a bunch of rectangles. So that is what I would recommend for that. And then this is another example where there's this electrical panel. Just make sure that writing is still staying consistent to the way that it is on the page. So the architectural lettering here is really nice. So I would recommend doing it by hand, and then just making this electrical panel note, aligned with the rest of the text. And then here I've scaled both of these pages down to fit just on one slide to talk about. This is the same project. So on the left we have the program written out, and I wanted to put this here because it is very legible. So I immediately, my eyes just kind of understand what I'm looking at and how this chart is working, because we create charts like this for a lot of things. I mean, this is essentially a receipt for the size of the house. So we naturally read it that way, and it would behoove you to organize your information in this way. And then these prototypicals on the right, these are coming in really, really nicely. My one suggestion, just like I said previously, there are areas where those dark lines aren't as solid. So, and this might be a scan quality, something that is not showing up on paper, but it's coming in on scan, or perhaps it is a scan showing that actually on the original you should add a little bit more ink there. So you could either go back and do that again, rescan it, or you can use PowerPoint and touch up just some of those things, because most of these are coming in really, really well. You can tell, graphically they're popping off the page. They're very well organized. And so it might just be using the computer the best of your ability to just touch up some of those areas. These are minor things too. Okay, so on this page, I had a hard time originally reading what I was seeing, and I realized that it's the dimensions. The dimensions are getting in the way of comprehending of the drawing. So I took the kitchen and the food prep drawing down here. I cropped it out of this and got rid of the label and then this arch right here. So I added how the logic of the dimensioning should go on the left-hand side along the top. And then when you have drawings like this that are a little bit more complicated, sometimes it is a good idea just to do a line through the kitchen when you have an island. So you just have 3 dimensions. You have the space between the counter and the island itself, and then the island and the other counter, or the other space. And then the dimension on the other axes of the distance between the island and the counter or another space. So instead of pulling those out and doing those outside of the drawing, you can easily just add a dimension line and then write your dimensions for those right in the space. And actually, as you read it, that's how you would read it anyway. You would see those numbers and understand the flow of the space versus finding these and then going up to see what they are. I also included a small dimension of these chairs. I'm assuming these are bar stools. I'm not completely sure, but I am going to make that assumption. If these are bar stools, a smart way to dimension this, and this was a part of your activity 6, was to call out the distance from shoulder to shoulder, essentially, or elbow to elbow. So when we measure humans sitting at a table, we don't measure the width of the chair. We measure from the center between two chairs to the center between two chairs, because that accounts for a little bit of elbow space just past the chairs. So if you notice this line, the dimension line is right in between those two chairs, and then the other line is right in between those two chairs. So you can just call out that little dimension and then write what that is. So you could go with the standard dimension. If you have a specific design of chair that has a specific dimension, put that in. Otherwise, any tiny little detail like that that's important to dimension, you can kind of call that out separately, aside from, the whole cluster. And then also, I can tell that this is a photograph because I'm thinking I can see some of the surface in the background. And also, you might need to look closely, but there are interior components and dimensions and notes on this paper, but they're in pencil. So they're really not showing up in the photograph, especially since the pen is coming in really nicely. So this is another case where the photograph is coming in brown. Try scanning in black and white, and I would also recommend, instead of pencil, using pen to add those interior components as well, and then poche the walls just to distinguish them from the interior components and the dimension lines. But other than that, definitely try to keep it a scan. Also, we can see the paper bending or the angle of the camera. You want to make sure everything is just flat and straight. This one. And some of these, you're still seeing the prototypicals drawn with a single line. If you are trying to indicate a wall, you should draw it as a wall. So 2 lines, the thickness of the wall, and then pocheted. And so in this, we can immediately tell that these weren't fully drafted with a straight edge, but they do have that, designer wiggle that you see in architectural drawings. Normally, this would not be preferred. However, the dimensions are very straight and plumb, and they're coming in very crisp and clear. So it's evident that these prototypicals are drawn to a specific style. And in that case, having a stylistic technique like that is totally fine and may aid in communicating the feeling or the concept of the project. So I just wanted to provide an example, because there's different ways. Sometimes you can try to do this and it's actually not very successful. And I think that you can see the crop from the scan. And so I'm not sure, if that's trace paper or vellum. You can't see it that much like you did with the ones that were coming in brown. So this does help minimize that contrast on the page without taking away from the actual drawings. Okay, yeah, so this is showing up really well on the page, and it's very effective in its communication. My suggestions: don't forget to maintain good handwriting. I know sometimes when you're working on a design project and you're not focused on the lettering, it can, go downhill, but it does have a big impact on the professional quality of the work overall. So don't forget to be consistent in spacing and the height of the letters. And then also, there is a smudge going right through the middle here. And I'm not sure if it's a smudge or if it's something that was underneath the paper when it was scanned and we're seeing the shadow of it. So it's not too bad here. I would try to eliminate it if possible. However, just be aware that this happens really easily with scans and photos. But other than that, this is reading really well. Really great drawing and good use of color. Here is one of the program diagrams for that project. So we're seeing those colors put into action. I am having trouble reading some of the bubbles that are the darker ones. There's just not enough contrast between the color and the pen. So there's many ways to go about that. It could be desaturating the bubbles, so they're just not as like juicy and colorful. Or it could be maybe to bring the color and just have colored outlines for the bubbles so that the words themselves are very clear and, uninterrupted by lines of color. But then also, because the colors are so vibrant, the lines really fall into the back. And so I would try to bring the lines up to the same graphic intensity as the rest of the drawing. And I'm almost seeing, because some of the lines are coming right into the circle, you might want to take pen and draw, a black line around each one of these circles. But I would try to minimize the amount of overlap of the pen onto the color. So you want to make it look like maybe it's going behind it instead of in front of it. And then here we have some bubble diagrams. So don't forget your bubble diagram skills. We've been working on these throughout the whole semester. And so this is the time to really show and tell your work and show your comprehension and your skill level. So definitely don't think, because this is a design project and this is like the bubble diagrams and the lettering aren't the main focus of the project, they still have a big impact on the overall feeling of the project. And in fact, the pre-design diagrams are really an opportunity to showcase the aesthetic intent in a color palette before you actually get to the floor plan and the other design work. So definitely think about color coding as a color palette. Doesn't have to be the color palette that you use in the space. It's more or less an intentional color scheme. So try to avoid putting two colors next to each other that don't look that great together. I'm not saying any of these colors are falling into that, but we just have a lot of colors happening here. And so, be aware of that. Maybe think of 5 or 6 colors that look really well together as a whole. So when you stand back, you're creating a composition on the entire page. So you want to make sure that graphically it's still pleasing to the eye. And so here we are seeing some more color coding without understanding what those colors mean. And I find it very interesting that the lines in the middle also have color coding. And you can see that this is very intentional. So I would love to know more about the color coding of the spaces, but then of the lines. Particularly the dining or the outdoor living is a solid yellow. Nothing else has a solid. So I'm very curious to know what that means. So make sure just to be clear. Otherwise, there's an obvious layer of information here that, people wouldn't, naturally pick up unless there was a code there. And then when it comes to adjacency matrix, they can be really difficult to get down. But here is the method that I would go about in creating the, best framework. I would start by creating a straight line, and that will be the edge of this rectangular chart that you're going to create, and then try to left justify all your spaces. And these are left justified. And then, you're going to create equal increments of the lines between them. So they're each going to have their cells. And then once you have this rectangular box, take the middle of that first line that you drew and connect it to a point that however long you want to go out. and then take from one corner and the next, bring those and connect those lines to that point. And where those lines intersect, that will create your triangle portion of this. So as you can see in the original, there's almost 2 angles going on here. And so I showed the triangles. One is green and one is black. If I were to check the angle of this in green, so this line, this green line is on the original line. And then on that same angle, which means where this green line intersects with this red center line, I connected another green line. And so you can see it made an equal triangle, and technically this should be the point, and not over here. Or if you want to go with the angle of this line, I put a black line over the original on the bottom, and where that intersects with the center line, I took another black line from the right hand corner. It looks like it got pushed a little, but from the right hand corner, and brought it over to where it intersects, and you're getting a smaller triangle. So the size of the triangle doesn't necessarily matter. There's no right or wrong. It's all about, is it visually communicating the information that you need to communicate? So with color coding, you can get away with small grid. If you're doing something with the dashed lines or, something like that, you might need a larger, but use that, process to get your framework down for the adjacency matrix to make sure that it's proportional. Okay, and then here we have some more bubble and block diagrams. So when you begin to apply the bubbles to the footprint and translate them to a block plan, again, think about how the color composition will look and how it can reinforce the client's aesthetic or your design concept. Because the adjacency matrix and the bubble diagrams before this, they were sort of removed from the footprint, from the actual design, but now we're bringing them in to the confines of the actual shell of the space. So we're starting to see those colors in the space. Not that they need to be the color palette, but they are framing it, so they're making it more obvious. And then also I drew these gray lines over this. So this originally did not have any floor plan applied to it. So it is clearly arranged based on the floor plan. So what you want to do when you do this is include the shell and draw your blocks or your bubbles proportional to the shell. But you want to make sure to carry over details of the shell that will stay in place, like the stairs and the vertical plumbing riser, as well as the railing line. And then, this is obviously open to below. So you want to make sure to include all of these. Immediately when I put this vertical riser in, it's right in the middle of the dining room. And this made me realize how far apart the kitchen, the utility, and the bath are from each other. It's like they were intentionally spread apart when in fact they should be clustered together because they're all plumbing related and they should be closer to the vertical plumbing shaft. But also think of storytell, so picture yourself walking into the space. How often is there a mudroom that walks directly into the dining room? Or a main entry that walks directly into the dining room. And this dining room looks to be a little bit more formal since it's so separated from the living and the kitchen space. So if you're going with a more formal dining room, you want it to have a more formal spatial approach to the floor plan. And also, if you are having friends over for dinner and you also have laundry going, it's going to make noise in the utility room and it's going to interrupt acoustically your entertainment. So think about those things and how you can maybe rework some of these issues together, and maybe it's switching the kitchen and the dining and the bath and the guest room. Maybe it's just kind of thinking about those a little bit differently. And then, the same down here. This is the same submission. Just make sure to bring over the stairs and show them accurately instead of a bubble themselves, so they don't get misunderstood as one of your bubbles, because they're not. They're part of the shell. And also, again, the vertical riser needs to be shown because it's there and it cannot be moved for this project. Okay, and then here is our last submission. We still have a few pages left, but the other pages are more for reference. On this page, this is a really great way to indicate circulation, because not only is it showing how that circulation space is allotted in the design, but it's also indicating a possible, movement or flow of space, of how somebody might move through the space. So it's kind of doing a few things at once in one diagram. And then let's see. I am noticing, so there's 2 options for each. So there's 2 options for the first floor and 2 options for the second floor. So I do think that the top option in both would be the best choice. Let's see. So yeah, with the kitchen located in the area that's open to above, if you have anything loud going on, like a dishwasher or a blender, that's going to echo up into the loft. That might not be a huge issue for a single bachelor, who, if he's in the kitchen, he might not be sleeping in his loft, but that is just something to consider. And then on the second floor, depending on the design you have for the edge of the loft space, whether it is a railing or a wall, if it's a railing, you might not want to put the bathroom next to it. That might just feel a little bit too exposed. So tucking it in or even putting it closer to this vertical riser would be, preferred. Yeah. And then also the master bedroom is a little bit more exposed here. But again, this could end up being a wall, in which case there's no interaction between this open space and the loft space. This would essentially be a closed off second floor as opposed to open to below. And then here I have some examples of scale figures. So don't forget about scale figures. You're going to want to show scale figures in the plan view, in your elevations, and in your section. And you don't need to show a scale figure for the more technical kitchen drawings. But also thinking about how you graphically depict this would be a good time to start thinking about how you're going to incorporate them in the 3-dimensional model. So I put in just some examples, and they're really easy to find online. So you can Google things like scale figures or architectural entourage. Many of the sites and the resources are free downloads, but not all. So if it's possible, also make sure you can get your images in vector format. If they are black and white drawings. Then vector means that you're just downloading the lines. So if you were to put a seated person on a drawing of your chair, you might see the chair underneath them. And then some of these, and also think about your style and how you draw in your design and what type of figure, maybe something more abstract, maybe something more photorealistic. You can bring down the opacity on these to be extremely ghosted. You could do just plain black and white. Think about inclusivity. So you can see there's, different types of people different body types. Obviously for this cabin, we have a client, so you might want to consider a single recently college grad-esque dude as a scale figure. And showing scale figures from above, you're going to see their head and you're going to see the shoulders. These are stylized where you're seeing shadows to make it look like there's some depth, but that also gives you an indication of a light source. So you could do this in your floor plan if you also feel like adding some shadows to the furniture and in some other areas. It's a style of drawing that just provides a little bit more depth. If not, you don't need to do it. You can just draw the head and the shoulders. But definitely just look around. Lecture 1, part 1, had examples of free-handed scale figures. So reference that, and then just do some research online and in your book on, how are you going to represent them in your own drawings. And this website is one I use professionally. It's free. It's nonscandinavia.com. So they're dedicated to finding really inclusive scale figures, because a lot of the times people that design things tend to add in scale figures that look like them. And so you start to see a lot of the same type of person in a space. And you don't want to let that, ruin your design, because that definitely is a way of showing that you're not really aware of the world or of culture or of reality. So definitely nonscandinavia.com. And they also have people, like riding their bikes and doing skateboards and some different lifestyle activities. So this is just a cut and paste of some of their figures. But their figures are cut out. So when you download them, they don't come in as this white box. You could essentially download this guy and then place him in your elevation, and it would look like he's there. So here are some examples of scale figures in 3 dimensions. There's a lot of, advanced ways of going about this, but the purpose of this model is to explore space volumetrically. So there's no need to go fancy. As you can see, these are little, just sketch paper cutouts or just regular paper cutouts. You could draw your scale figures and then cut them out. And then think about how they're going to stand up in your model. So it's possible that you might be able to have them lean against the counter or something, but when you take your photograph, you want to be able to at least see a silhouette of somebody in the space. And it doesn't have to be just, a person standing there. You could have a cat in the window or a dog running around. You could think about the life of that and think about what the client is like, artist and a writer. So maybe a scale figure sitting at a desk writing, or I think I said he has some friends over, maybe a few people. Think about that. And sometimes scale figures that are stickers work really well too. This is a little bit more advanced, but there is that transparency paper that you can print out on. They are hard. You can see he's sticking it into foam, so they stand up more. That's a technique to get things to stand up on your paper. So think about that. And you can also see a branch, which is indicating a tree. I mean, we're showing a 3-dimensional model of the interior, so you're not going to quite get into thinking about the site design in 3D. But if it comes into play, if you have an emphasis on plants inside, something like that, a green wall, you might want to think about creative ways to integrate that into your model. And then last but not least, in your drawing, there is the requirement for the site plan or a floor plan drawn on the site plan. And so there are some creative ways of drawing bushes and trees and flowers and shrubs. And here are some vegetation too. So pretty much anything you can think of, you can look up. So, if you want, a limestone porch, you might look up different designs for maybe it's specific type of tiles, or maybe you're just thinking of concrete. So what does the hatching of concrete look like from above, which we did go over. There's a lecture that covers materiality of really basic materials. You might, of course, have a design that requires something different. So we can talk about that together and how to draw that, but don't be afraid to look things up in your book and use the internet as your resource, even if it's just looking at drawings done by other people to see how they indicate, trees and bushes and stone walkways or cars or driveways or things like that. There's a lot of different ways. It's not a one size fits all. So yeah. And obviously these are just cut and pasted. And a lot of the times you can find these free online as well to download, and then you can almost just put these right onto your drawing. So that is a little bit of review from what was recently submitted from Activity 7 and 8. I look forward to soon reviewing Activity 9. I've already spoken to some students and seen some of that work, and it's really well. So I'm really excited to continue seeing that. I hope that this review was helpful and just giving some pointers. And this is all about the process of submitting these activities to receive feedback. So then when you integrate them into the final deliverable, you can include some of that feedback too. So thank you, everybody.